Dan, why is China so keen then to develop its domestic resources that, of course, are so central to the EV sector?
Yeah, for a long time, Tom, China's economy has been based on importing natural resources from other parts of the world and then using those resources to produce, manufactured commercial goods, consumer goods that it sells to the rest of the world. But in the past couple of years, with increased pressure from the U.S., it's starting to try to build a little bit more self-resiliency. And one of the places that you can see that really clearly is Yichun. It's this small, by China standards, small, it's several million people, town in Jiangxi province that's rich in a very low-grade ore for lithium. And now we were there a couple of weeks ago, and it's just trucks are rumbling down mountains filled with this ore every 30 seconds or so. Processing plants are doing their best to turn it into battery-grade material, and to try to make sure that China is increasing its production of this stuff and becoming less reliant on importers like Chile and Australia.
Yeah, so it's part of that self-reliance story. So there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of demand, but you and the team found that actually many of these companies are not actually making any money.
Yeah, a lot of these mines were started a couple of years ago when lithium prices were sky high, but they've fallen about 90% since 2021. And now, this ore that Yichun is rich in, it's called lepidolite. It's very low grade. It contains 1-2% of its mass is actually lithium, and so it requires a lot of expensive processing, heating, chemicals, and then it requires a lot of dealing with environmental waste, which is also very costly. And so it's incredibly expensive to process. But these companies are still doing it, in part because there's government pressure to keep jobs up, but in a large part also because there's these long-term strategic concerns about making sure these resources are ready if anything were to happen that would block them from foreign sources.
Dan, how's the local government balancing the need, and the pressure's there, isn't it, from the central government to ensure that there aren't too many, or that the environmental impact of heavy industry is not overly significant? We know that is a bigger issue now for the authorities in Beijing. So how are the local, provincial authorities squaring the need for this sustainable supply chain with an environmental cost?
Yeah, there's undoubtedly there's going to be an environmental cost anytime there's resource extraction. But several years ago, when this boom first started happening, there were reports of people dumping waste into rivers, and high pollution levels in rivers that are used by locals to wash clothes, to water their gardens. This is a beautiful part of China with lush green mountains, brilliant yellow fields of rapeseed flowers, and the government really wants to protect it. So, what we saw were, new developments of tailing ponds with, thick vinyl coatings that wouldn't allow any water to leak into the local drink water supply. Those trucked roads coming down from the mountains, every 30 or 40 meters, there were little water sprayers to keep the ore moist so it wouldn't, fly off and get into the local rivers and streams. So the government's definitely putting some effort into making sure that the river and the environment stays clean. But again, those efforts require costs for companies, and it's costs that eat into already tight margins.